In the wake of Wednesday's council meeting on the ICJ orders, Algeria circulated a new draft text after echoing the view of South Africa and Palestine that the order of the World Court cannot be implemented but through an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, a key UN demand.
I repeat, of course, my request and demand for compliance with international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and the infrastructure they depend on. Hospitals, medical personnel, patients must be protected. So I reiterate my call for the immediate release of all hostages. And of course, I cannot end without repeating the appeal of our Secretary General for a humanitarian ceasefire so that we can start rebuilding Gaza and giving its families a sense of a future.
New draft that demands an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, that parties comply with their obligations under international law, rejects the forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza, and reiterates earlier calls for full and unhindered humanitarian access into and throughout the entire Gaza Strip. But it makes no mention of Hamas or the Israeli hostages, which has been a red line for countries like the United States on previous resolutions it has vetoed.
Conflict in motion on October 7th when it carried out the deadliest attack against Jews since the Holocaust. It now has a choice to make. It can continue to dig tunnels, to plan for its next attack, to use civilians and civilian infrastructure as human shields, or Hamas can lay down its weapons and accept the proposal on the table to release every hostage. We all have an obligation to ensure that any action this council takes in the coming days increases pressure on Hamas to make the right decision.
A reference to a second hostage deal at the behest of the United States, France, Egypt, Israel and Qatar that envisions a 45-day humanitarian pause, a phased release of Israeli hostages in return for Palestinian prisoners, but falls short of a permanent ceasefire sought by many.
The proposal on the table is strong, and it is compelling. It envisions a much longer humanitarian pause than we saw in November, and it would allow for us to get the hostages out and more life-saving food, water, and medicine into Gaza. These are extremely sensitive negotiations, so I will not go into all the details here. But I think we can all agree that this would change the situation on the ground. It would move the parties one step closer to the sustainable cessation of hostilities that we all desire.
As South Africa expressed its frustration that Israel continues to kill Palestinian civilians in contravention of the court's explicit ruling that it take all measures within its power to prevent genocidal acts, which include the killing of Palestinians and causing serious bodily and mental harm to them.
Fortunately, in the days since the court's decision, we have seen the Israeli government continue its illegal actions in violation of the court order. South Africa will continue to act within institutions of global governance to protect the rights, including the fundamental right to life, of Palestinians in Gaza, which continue to remain at urgent risk, including from Israeli military assault, starvation and disease, and to obtain the fair and equal application of international law to all in the interest of our collective humanity.
As she urged the Council to fulfill its mandate and focus its efforts on enforcing peace. As consultations on the new draft resolution commence, history teaches us to lower our expectations of an outcome favorable to all. The US has already signaled that it believes the conditions to sustain a ceasefire do not currently exist. And while the Arab group, led by Algeria, will seek to use its collective muscle to give effect to demands for that ceasefire in the Council, diplomatic efforts elsewhere might just be the main game in town to keep an eye on in the short term. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.